Tonight on The Readout.
I would like to promise and pledge that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Six years after those remarks, Republican candidates across the country are following Trump's lead, threatening democracy by refusing to say whether they will accept election results that they don't like. Also tonight, what's next after a very bad week for Trump, with the special master telling his lawyers to put up or shut up, and New York's Attorney General exposing years of alleged fraud. And as Kevin McCarthy makes his pitch for Speaker, President Biden reminds Americans exactly what Republicans want to take from you if they win. Things like reproductive rights and Social Security. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Johnson, in for Joy Reid. And we begin tonight with the cancer that continues to rot what's left of the desiccated corpse of the Republican Party. Moments from now, the former president will stand shoulder to shoulder with Ted Budd, North Carolina's Republican Senate nominee. Budd has refused to say whether he would accept this year's election results, only if he loses. Budd voted against certifying the 2020 presidential election as a member of Congress just hours after the attack on the Capitol. And he's not the only one. From the Carolinas to California, from Cancun to Grant's Tomb, election denialism has infected the Republican organization because they barely act like a party. According to the website 538, 60% of Americans will have an election denier on the ballot this fall. Out of the more than 500 Republicans running for office, nearly a quarter of them have fully rejected the legitimacy of the 2020 election. If you want a preview of just what life would look like with these kinds of folks in control, just take a look at Georgia, where election deniers are now using false claims to challenge the legitimacy of more than 60,000 voter registrations. And they just happen, I know this is shocking, to be voters that are in counties full of black and brown people. These challenges were brought about because Georgia Secretary of State, the one who's pretending that he stood up for rights, refused to overturn the 2020 election for Trump. But state Republicans, afraid of making the MAGA king and all his other people look angry at them, decided to pledge their allegiance and change state election laws to fix problems that don't exist. Earlier today, the duly elected president of the United States, Joe Biden, just warned how dangerous this election denialism really is.
It's become a litmus test in their party to pledge loyalty to Donald Trump by buying into the big lie. You can't let the integrity of our elections be undermined. Democracy can't survive. It cannot survive. Not a joke. Can't survive when one side believes there's only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated.
One of the most prominent election deniers he's referring to is currently running to control Arizona's elections. Mark Fincham is the Republican nominee for Secretary of State. He's currently a state legislator and actually tried to decertify the Arizona election results back in 2020, but he failed. He's also a member of the Oath Keepers, that right-wing paramilitary group, and he attended the Capitol insurrection. According to Politico, a fellow Republican in the Arizona House was shocked at Fincham's success, given that, quote, Mark is known as the guy that's probably the dumbest, well, there's a long list, but one of the dumbest legislators in the House, with friends like these. Look, last night, Fincham faced off with his Democratic opponent, Adrian Fontes, the former Maricopa County recorder who oversaw the 2020 election for really the entire country. It was a jarring side-by-side of two vastly different perspectives, one grounded in reality and the other grounded in the unhinged fever dreams of the big lie.
Knowing what we know today, there are certain counties that should have been set aside as irredeemably compromised. Maricopa County was one of them.
When we have conspiracy theories and lies like the ones Mr. Fincham has just shared, based in no real evidence, what we end up doing is eroding the faith that we have in each other as citizens.
Later, Fincham pretty much made President Biden's point when he said that the reason we can trust results of his primary and not those of the 2020 election was because he won.
Was the August midterm election fair? Were there any improprieties you saw?
I have no idea. It is what it is.
What changed?
I mean, what changed?
Yes.
The candidates.
While Election Day might be weeks away, you can already vote in North Carolina, Minnesota, South Dakota, Virginia, and Wyoming. And joining me now to discuss all this is Adrian Fontes himself, the Democratic nominee for Arizona Secretary of State. Thank you so very much. I have to mention this, Adrian. I watched that debate, and it reminded me of that old SNL sketch where the characters are like, how am I losing to this guy? Like, I can't imagine what it was like being on stage with someone like that. I just want to start with this. You're running for Secretary of State. That is a incredibly important responsibility. What are the responsibilities of the Secretary of State in Arizona? Because it changes state by state. So what would you be responsible for in 2024?
First, thanks for having me. The Secretary of State in Arizona is the chief election regulator, chief election officer in Arizona. The 15 counties run the actual elections. The secretary really kind of herds all of those cats. We also have business services and public services inside of that office. Near and dear to my heart are the archives and libraries. But we really are sort of a ministerial office. The Secretary of State does critically certify the election results that come out of the canvases of each of Arizona's counties. And I think that's the main point of discussion for today.
And so the certification process, that would be, you look at all the different counties, they give you their election results, and it's your job to evaluate if those are legitimate. It's your job to rubber stamp what they do. How does that certification process actually work?
Well, it's not really a rubber stamp. A good secretary will work with the counties as they are building their canvases, will review them ahead of time before the counties actually perform the canvass, do the vote that certifies, and then sends to the secretary's office. Good teams don't just rubber stamp. They make sure to work together along the way through the entire process so that it is smooth, so that we do have free and fair elections, so that we do have predictable government, rational government, and not just weird chaos, which is what my opponent is presenting. And we just want things to work normally, right? And that's really how the process is supposed to work.
Exactly. Your job is to scrutinize what is delivered to you and then make sure it's fair for the entire country. And frankly, Arizona will be one of the states where the entire country's eyes are going to be on you. With that being in mind, I want to play you some sound here of your opponent. The country was all focused on something that he was involved in last year. I want to get your thoughts about it on the other side.
Do you think Arizona voters want their chief elections officer at a riot at the U.S. Capitol to overturn an election? Is that what you think Arizona residents, citizens, voters want?
The last time I checked, to be at a place when something's happening is not illegal.
I'll be honest with you. If I was at something that turned into a riot, I would have left. I would have condemned it. If I'm at a party where there was like drinking going on, then I was in high school, I left. I was that kid. So I guess I have my standards are too high for someone running for office. But what are your thoughts about that? It's not only someone who's going to be responsible of holding a sacred oath of counting the ballot in the state of Arizona. What are your thoughts about running against someone who was basically a participant, bare minimum, an observer in an attempted coup of the United States government?
It was a crime scene, and he claims to have been a law enforcement officer, although the do not rehire from Kalamazoo Police Department speaks a little more to that. It was a crime scene, and it wasn't just any old crime scene or any old riot. This was an attempted overthrow of the government of the United States of America, where they had a gallows set up to hang Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. This was an attempted coup, and for him to minimize it like that is not just callous, it's obscene as against the constitutional order of the greatest democracy this planet has ever seen. And folks like this are all over the country, and they're dangerous in their delusion. And the delusion is that it wasn't that big of a deal, and that this is just some kind of political gamesmanship. Their lack of capacity to understand the gravity of the moment and the destructive nature of their advocacy for this unpredictable chaos, that's bad. And it's really a negative reflection on the rest of us that we haven't fought back with a lot more vigor, that we haven't held them to account with a lot more disdain. that we haven't moved more quickly to hold those who committed acts of violence that resulted in the deaths of law enforcement officers, by the way, to hold them accountable. So shame on us for not going harder against these guys. Shame on us for not swinging back with the strength that they are coming at our democracy with. Shame on us for not standing up like so many other generations have for our own voting rights and our own democracy.
This is the kind of thing we want to hear from our elected officials. Thank you. Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, we will definitely try and have you back. Really appreciate it. Let's bring in Nsé Ufot, CEO of the New Georgia Project and one of the most impressive voter organizers and activists that I have ever had the opportunity to interview. Nsé, I'm going to ask this because we just talked to Adrian Fontes. He's running for Secretary of State in Georgia. Georgia still has a Secretary of State whose claim to fame is that he did the minimum in 2020. He decided to not overturn an election. But there are still concerns about voter suppression and questionable practices on the part of the Secretary of State's office in the state of Georgia right now. What is going on in Georgia with the electoral system and with certain voting places that's making it harder for people to go out and practice the franchise?
The Georgia Republican Party, of which our Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is a member, has taken a sledgehammer to our elections infrastructure, and they're doing everything that they can to cheat in advance of the November 8th elections. A lot has been written and said about Senate Bill 202, which was Georgia's own version of the anti-voting bill. I will remind your viewers that over 50 provisions in Georgia's laws were changed, including creating 5 new crimes for voting-related behavior, 2 of them, which are felonies, would carry with them penalties that are several years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. Just this Wednesday, Gwinnett County, the second largest county in Georgia, soon to be the largest county in Georgia, the most racially and ethnically diverse county in the southeastern United States, an individual, random citizen was trying to challenge the voter status of 37,500 Gwinnett County voters. Again, the most ethnically and racially diverse county in the southeastern United States. Why that number matters so much in a state where there are 7 million voters? Because Georgia is America's newest battleground state. Georgia is America's newest swing state. The margin of victory for the president of the United States was just over 11,000 votes. That's 0.00015 percentage points. And Republicans have allowed it that any individual can challenge an unlimited number of voters in any county in Georgia. That is deeply problematic. We don't have the resources. We are 46 days away from a historic election where there promises to be historic levels of participation. They are trying to break the machinery of Georgia's elections infrastructure, because when everyone votes and every vote is counted, they will no longer be in power. It's obvious and it's disgusting. And Brad Raffensperger has endorsed it. He has endorsed it. He is in lockstep with his party. He has not in any way come out against these attacks on Georgia's elections as an individual citizen, as a patriot, nor as Georgia's chief elections officer.
Well, look, we've all known that you can't really trust anything out of Raffensperger as a staff label and an organization. The Secretary of State's office is clearly compromised and has been since before, when you had Brian Kemp, who was in charge of these sorts of things and got to sort of administer his own run for governor. My question, just very quickly, because a lot of people are concerned about this, when they hear this kind of news about Georgia, when they hear about these challenges, when they hear about the kinds of things Brian Kemp was doing, and they see the poll numbers, they're like, oh my gosh, is there any chance that any of these candidates that care about democracy, like Bee Nguyen and Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock, can win? What is something that people don't know about Georgia? Are there large numbers of people who haven't been counted in this polling yet? Are there places where registration has gone up that may counter some of this voter suppression? What's actually happening on the ground that may give people some hope about what the future might look like in that state in 46 days?
What people need to know is that, one, the New Georgia Project alone has registered an additional 30,000 Black people and young people this year since MLK Day of 2022, not to mention people who continue to move to the state. One. Number two, what people need to know is that almost 7 out of 10 absentee ballots that have been requested up to this point have been requested by women. And we are absolutely in a post-Dobbs era. What people need to know is that there has been a 300% increase in Black Georgians requesting absentee ballots. And so there's polling, which takes a snapshot of what people think about in this moment. And then there's the data that's coming from the actual ballots that people are requesting that they are going to submit, right? I think what people need to know is that while there are challenges with the brand of the national political parties, that Stacey Abrams is not the DNC, right? And that people know her, they know her work, they know her leadership, and they know what is at stake for Georgians in this moment. And that's what folks don't know and understand.
Nsé Ufot, we could talk throughout the entire show. Thank you so much for starting us off on the readout today.
Thank you.